Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling. Chapter 13. Nicholas Flamel. Dumbledore had convinced Harry not to go looking for the Mirror of Erased again, and for the rest of the Christmas holidays the invisibility cloak stayed folded at the bottom of his trunk. Harry wished he could forget what he'd seen in the mirror as easily, but he couldn't. He started having nightmares. Over and over again, he dreamed about his parents disappearing in a flash of green light, while a high voice cackled with laughter. You see, Dumbledore was right. The mirror could drive you mad, said Ron when Harry told him about the dreams. Hermione, who came back the day before them, took a different view of things. She was torn between horror and the idea of Harry being out of bed, roaming the school 3 nights in a row. If Filch had caught you! And disappointment that he hadn't at least found out who Nicholas Flamel was. They had almost given up hope of even finding Flamel in a library book, even though Harry was still sure he'd read the name somewhere. Once term had started, they were back to skimming through books for 10 minutes during their breaks. Harry had ever less time than the other two because Quidditch practice had started again. Wood was working the team harder than ever. Even the endless rain that had replaced the snow couldn't dampen his spirits. The Weasleys complained that Wood was becoming fantastic, but Harry was on Wood's side. If they won their next match against the Hufflepuff, they would overtake Slytherin in the House Championship for the first time in 7 years. Quite apart from wanting to win, Harry found that he had fewer nightmares than he was tired out after training. Then, during one particularly wet and muddy practice session, Wood gave the team a bit of bad news. He'd just got very angry with the Weasleys, who kept dive-bombing each other and pretending to fall off the brooms. "Will you stop messing around?" he yelled. "That's exactly the sort of thing that will lose us the match. Snape's refereeing this time, and he'll be looking for any excuse to knock points off Gryffindor." George Weasley really did fall off his broom at these words. "Snape's refereeing?" He spluttered through a mouthful of mud. "Once he's ever refereed out of Quidditch match, he's not going to be fair if he might overtake Slytherin." The rest of the team landed next to George to complain too. "It's not my fault," said Wood. "We just got to make sure we play a clean game, so Snape hasn't got an excuse to pick on us." Which was all very well, thought Harry, but he had another reason for not wanting Snape near him while he was playing Quidditch. The rest of the team hung back to talk to each other as usual on the end of practice, but Harry headed straight back to the Gryffindor common room, where he found Ron and Hermione playing chess. Chess was the only thing Hermione ever lost at, something Harry and Ron thought was very good for her. "Don't talk to me for a moment," said Ron when Harry sat down next to him. "I need to He caught sight of Harry's face. "What's the matter with you? You look terrible." Speaking quietly so that no one else would hear, Harry told the other two about Snape's sudden, sinister desire to be a Quidditch referee. "Don't play," said Hermione at once. "Say you're ill," said Ron. "Pretend to break your leg," Hermione suggested. "Really break your leg," said Ron. "I can't," said Harry. "There isn't a reserve, Seeker. If I back out, Gryffindor can't play at all." At that moment, Neville toppled into the common room. Now, how he had managed to climb through the portrait hole was anyone's guess, because his legs had been stuck together with what they recognized at once as the leg locker curse. He might have had to bunny hop all the way up to Gryffindor Tower. Anyone fell about laughing except Hermione, who leaped up and performed the counter curse. Neville's legs sprang apart, and he got to his feet trembling. "What happened?" Hermione asked him, leading him over to sit with Harry and Ron. "Malfoy," said Neville shakily. "I met him outside the library. He said he'd be looking for some practice that on." "Go to Professor McGonagall," Hermione argued Neville. "Report him." Neville shook his head. "I don't want more trouble," he mumbled. "You got to stand up for him, Neville," said Ron. "He used to walking all over the people, but that's no reason to lie down in front of him and make it easier." "There's no need to tell me I'm not brave enough to be in Gryffindor. Malfoy's already done that," Neville choked. Harry felt in the pocket of his robes and pulled out a chocolate flock, every last one from the box Hermione had given him for Christmas. He gave it to Neville, who looked as though he might cry. You're worth 12, Malfoy, Harry said. The Sorting Hat chose you for Gryffindor, didn't it? And where's Malfoy? In stinking Slytherin. Neville's lips twitched in a weak smile as he unwrapped the frog. Thanks, Harry. I think I'll go to bed. You want the card you collect, Sam, don't you? As Neville walked away, Harry looked at the famous wizard card. Dumbledore again, he said. He was the first one I ever... He gasped. He stared at the back of the heart, then looked at Ron and Hermione. I found him, he whispered. I found Flamel. I told you I'd read the name somewhere before. I read it on the train coming here. Listen to this. Professor Dumbledore is especially famous for his defeat on the Dark Wizard Grindelwald in 1945, for the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with his partner, Nicholas Flamel. Hermione jumped to her feet. She hadn't looked so excited since they got back Max for their very first piece of homework. Stay there, she said, and she sprinted up the stairs to the girls' dormitories. Harry and Ron barely had time to exchange mischievous looks before she was dashing back, an enormous old book in her arms. I never thought to look in there, she whispered excitedly. I got this out of the library weeks ago for a bit of light reading. Light? Said Ron, but Hermione told him to be quiet until she'd looked something up and started flicking passionately through the pages, muttering to herself. At last she found what she was looking for. I knew it! I knew it! Are we allowed to speak yet? Said Ron grumpily. Hermione ignored him. Nicholas Flamel, she whispered dramatically, is the only known maker of the Sorcerer's Stone. This didn't have quite the effect she'd expected. The what? Harry and Ron. Oh, honestly, don't you two read? Look, read that, there. She put the book towards them, and Harry and Ron read. The ancient study of alchemy is concerned with making the Sorcerer's Stone, a legendary substance with astonishing powers. The stone will transform any metal into pure gold. It also produces the elixir of life, which will make the drinker immortal. There have been many reports of the Sorcerer's Stone over the centuries, but the only stone currently in existence belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, the noted alchemist and opera lover. Mr. Flamel, who celebrated his 665th birthday last year, enjoys a quiet life in Devon with his life per now. 658. See? Said Hermione, when Harry and Ron had finished. The dog must be quite in famous Sorcerer's Stone. I bet he asked Dumbledore to keep it safe for him, because they're friends and he knew someone was after it. That's why he wanted the stone moved out of Gringotts. A stone that makes gold and stops you ever dying, said Harry. No wonder Snape's after it. Anyone would want it. And no wonder we couldn't find Flamel in the study of recent developments in wizardry, said Ron. He's not exactly recent if he's 655, isn't he? Next morning, Defense the Dark Arts, while copying down different ways of treating werewolf bites, Harry and Ron were still discussing what they'd do with the Sorcerer's Stone if they had one. It wasn't until Ron said he'd buy his own Quidditch team that Harry remembered about Snape and he come in a match. I'm going to play, he told Ron and Hermione. If I don't, all the Slytherins will think I'm just too scared to face Snape. I'll show them. I'll really wipe the smiles off the faces if you win. Just as long as we're not wiping you off the beach, said Hermione. As the match drew nearer, however, Harry became more and more nervous, whatever he told Ron and Hermione. The rest of the team weren't too calm either. The idea of overtaking Slytherin to the house championship was wonderful. No one had done it for nearly 7 years. But would they be allowed to with such a beast to reverse? Harry didn't know whether he was imagining it or not, but he seemed to keep running into Snape wherever he went. At times, he even wondered whether Snape was following him, trying to catch him on his own. Potions lessons were turning into a sort of weekly torture. Snape was so horrible to find out about the Sorcerer's Stone. Harry didn't see how he could, yet he sometimes had the horrible feeling that Snape could read minds. Harry knew when they wished him good luck outside the changing rooms next afternoon, whenever they'd see him alive again. This wasn't what you called comforting. Harry hardly heard a word of a brute's beep talk as he pulled on his Quidditch robes and picked up his Nimbus 2000. Ron and Hermione, meanwhile, had found a place in stands next to Neville, who couldn't understand why they looked so grim and worried, or why they had both brought their wands to the match. Little did Harry know that Ron and Hermione had been secretly practicing the leg locker curse. They got the idea from Malfoy using it on Neville, and were ready to use it on Snape if he showed any sign of wanting to hurt Harry. Now, don't forget, it's Locomotor Mortis, Hermione muttered as Ron slipped his wand up his sleeve. I know, Ron gasped. Don't nag.